should not be treated in the same way.
Well, joining me live now is Aaron Zellin, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Aaron, what did you make of what we heard there from the rebel leader in that interview? Do you think, in a way, he was speaking maybe indirectly to Western leaders who could still be a bit skeptical about his group's control of Syria?
Yeah, I definitely think that one of the things he's been trying to do over the last couple of weeks since they took over the country is to appeal to Western countries. It's not the first time either. I mean, if you'll recall, in 2020, he talked to Frontline about getting off of the terrorism designation list as well. So it's one of the key asks that HTS is having right now when they talk to Western countries.
Do you think that's going to happen? I mean, as you mentioned, he's been calling for this. Will Western countries like the U.S. and U.K. Take this group off the terror list, and would there be any conditions attached to that?
I think the terror list will be difficult to get off of. Secretary Blinken of the United States obviously laid down some outlines of what they're hoping to have for a transition in Syria, which I think if HTS follows through on, could down the line lead to that. It's more likely, though, that sanctions related to the Assad regime could be eased because those were specific to that and not HTS, and therefore could provide more assistance with humanitarian aid as well as bringing in more things that could be beneficial to the economy going forward.
He had some reassurances, too, about things like education for women. How much of that should be taken with a grain of salt in terms of being affiliated with a group like al-Qaeda? I know that al-Qaeda, that was many years ago, of course, but when you hear those sorts of things in an interview like that, what's your response?
Well, there is a difference between HTS and the Taliban, as alluded to. Women are allowed to go out in public. They don't need a male guardian or anything along those lines. And they are also educated from, younger ages, but also through to, graduate school as well. I mean, there are women in their, medical college, for example, at Idlib University. So that's not necessarily the issue. The issue is more whether they would have actual political representation, because within sort of the consultative council and the heads of the ministries within the government that they set up there, the Salvation Government, we haven't seen any evidence that any women have been a part of that aspect of it.
Yeah, talk a bit about that experience governing. We know HTS does have some experience running Idlib province since 2017, providing things like running water, electricity, collecting trash. I mean, does that experience give us any insight into how the group might end up running the entire country?
Yeah, I mean, if past is precedent, essentially it would be this elite-led male process where a small cohort of people would be making a lot of the decisions for the rest of the society. We didn't see women or minorities involved in that decision-making, though, in the 7 years that they had the Salvation Government prior to them taking over the country.
We heard in that interview mention, anyway, that there would be a constitution written potentially by a senior board. Is it foolish, though, to think that Syria will all of a sudden, after many decades of autocratic rule, become this democracy?
Well, I think that, many of the people that went out into the streets in 2011 and many of the activists involved in the movement in general, worked on wanting to have democracy and liberalism in society. So there is some basis within the society. And then you can also go all the way back to 1920, where there was a relatively progressive constitution created by Syrians. But unfortunately, due to France's colonial, actions within Syria after that, that never came into being. So there is a potential basis where we could see this happening.
We heard that number there in the introduction, 100,000 Syrians returning to the country. What does that mean for Syria? And could we see those refugees returning now, bringing new experience from the countries they've been living in, and potentially bringing the previous experience? So there was a pretty big brain drain out of Syria, wasn't there, during the civil war?
Yeah, I mean, you've had many Syrians that became refugees, and they were either educated in Syria or became educated in, places like Germany and the like. And therefore, they have a lot of experiences. They also have more access to capital. And therefore, while, humanitarian aid is great, I think also it's important to understand that, trying to build up businesses and investment is also important, too, so that Syria isn't just reliant on the international community, but Syrians themselves help rebuild their country as well.
A lot of work still to be done there in Syria. Aaron Zellin, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute. Thank you, as always.
Thanks for having me.